My name is William, and I am a grad student at George Mason University studying to become an English teacher. For this Pechakucha presentation, I'm going to talk about my perspectives on writing, as well as the perspectives of my little sister, Angela, who is a sophomore at Oakton High School studying to become whatever she would like to become. Our first topic is going to be how we learned how to write, what influenced our relationship to writing, when we were young, and all sorts of influences in or out of school. So for me, a lot of my initial influences were in games, right? So this picture here demonstrates, two cards from Magic the Gathering, as well as one scene from Alpha Centauri. Two different games that both had, a really cool appeal to me as a kid, and also lots of cool vocabulary. So via these games, I learned words like events, seething, obstinate, magnanimous, vendetta, simulacrum, all sorts of crazy words that I don't think my peers knew when I was that young, and I just really liked them. I was like, a simulacrum. What in the world is a simulacrum? Well, I can judge from the card text that it replaces, one guy with another guy or something like that. And I knew, these words were really cool because they were associated with something that I thought was really cool, games. So for me, part of the process of me learning, to expand vocabulary, learning to write, learning to apply new and different and crazy words, and just thinking that words were cool was just this beginning process of just being exposed to all sorts of crazy words in the context of games, which I thought were really cool. Another influence on my early writing was hip-hop. So in the beginning, around middle school, I started writing a lot of poetry, and I was thinking, poetry is actually pretty similar to rap music, right? And I realized, as I listened to more hip-hop and rap music, that the power of words is not just in the letters, not just in the meaning, but also in the sound, right? So when you have a poem, the poem's not just words, it's not just, black and white. They assemble to create syllables, and the syllables assemble to create a cadence, to create a rhythm. And my exposure to hip-hop really, demonstrated that for me. It really made me think about that, and it made me try to incorporate that into my own poetry and later on into my own writing in general. I tried to, sometimes be a bit poetic in my prose or be a bit dry in my poetry, just to experiment. And all the time I would try to, think about how the words sound, right? So when I would write, I would think about how they sound, think about the words, not just as words, but as music. Now, the second topic, what do I believe are the purposes of writing in and out of school? So one of the purposes is just to be able to create something. So I began writing recreationally, mainly poetry, and also, just fiction, just making things up, right? So this picture has a scene that you would never see in real life, but you could see it in your mind if you write it or read it, and that is one of the mightiest powers of writing, and it's one of the powers that I really enjoyed as a kid, just reading fiction books and going to places I could have never gone to in real life. So the power and the purpose is to be able to convey beauty, essentially, but not just that. You can convey anything, and this example is just an example of the fact that you can really convey anything in any art media, really. So writing is one of those media, has a lot of power, and so is visual art. Now, in the next, we have a quote by Brian Eno in a book called Zen Guitar, and the quote talks about drawing the frame. So really, when you read this entire quote, you think, okay, so I'm trying to position anything I create in a context, right? What does it do? Where does it fit? What does it relate to? So this applies to art and writing and music. And, when you think about it, it means that all of these media can have any sorts of purposes that you can imagine, as long as you position it to have that purpose. So writing can just be a vehicle for recording, data, in science, or it can be, a way to deliver news, or it can be a way to deliver beauty, or it can be a way to, persuade. There are a lot of different things that writing can do, and I think the purposes does depend on where you want to position the purpose of your writing to be. So let's talk about the factors that supported my writing in and out of school. So the first was, in school, I really enjoyed my writing classes. So this here we have a page or a couple pages from a text of Hamlet, and I annotated it religiously, and I just really enjoyed annotating it. And part of annotating it just helped me get really invested in the writing, right? So I would be able to approach the writing. So before, I talked about how you can approach writing by thinking of it as music, right? Approach writing by how it sounds. You can also approach writing by how it looks, right? So writing has both a look and a sound. And here, I'm not only exploring the semantics, I'm not only exploring the meaning of what is going on in Hamlet, but also I'm exploring my own style of how to annotate it and how that looks, right? So in the passages, I'm marking, where the tone shifts. I'm marking, what these lines are talking about. And I just really enjoyed being able to do that and learning that that's a thing you can do with writing. Like before, I forgot which AP English class, but before I learned how to annotate, I hadn't annotated at all, and I didn't realize that, writing had this kind of visual component to it. And of course, the opportunity to write poetry in school and out of school just really inspired me to keep writing, right? So this is one of the poems that I wrote in college, and just an example of poetry being a good outlet for, what you think, right? I wrote this when I was first looking up at the trees, and I was imagining the trees as something, and then I just decided to write something that I thought sounded pretty based on that. Now, what factors impeded my writing? So here we have a shot of a business law textbook. So I had to study this textbook in college, and I thought the writing was really uninspiring. Like, when you read it, I'm not going to read it for you, but when you read it, it was just it made you not want to read, made you not want to write that way. At least that's what happened to me. So that really impeded my interest in writing in that front. And then here we have the notorious 5-paragraph format of an essay. It's really standard, and rationally, I don't think it's bad, but just when I was in school learning it and writing it, it just wasn't very interesting, right? It was so formulaic that it made the process of writing not really like an exploratory or an expressive process, but more of like a math process, like a formulaic process. Now, of course, in math, there's also ways to express yourself, but in the 5-paragraph essays, I was just like, okay, I have to have this thesis, I have to have these topic sentences, I have to have this conclusion, bam, 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 bam. I just fill out these points, and it's done, right? It's good, and that's it. But writing is so much more than that. It can be anything. It isn't just it, right? It can continue beyond that. Now let's talk about what Angela thought about these questions. So how did she learn how to write? So when I talked to her, she said that some of her early influences that helped her, learn how to write were like young adult fiction books, so like Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. This is a picture of Harry Potter. And also a book series called the Warriors series, where you had a bunch of cats and they were warriors. So, thinking about this, it tells me that what you read is really important to what you write. And when I look back on my own influences, there are all sorts of media. So does media in general, whatever media you're exposed to, influences the kind of media you create, right? So I was exposed to these words or this music, and that influenced how I wrote, and she was exposed to these books, and this is what she read, and this is what she consumed, and that developed, how she learned how to write. Now, what did she think about the purposes of writing? Here we have a shot of a page from some notes, and we have a zoom in on ideas. So the first thing she told me when I asked her this question was that ideas are the most important. Writing, its purpose is to record ideas, to write them down, which sounds kind of like a tautology, right? It's like, oh, I'm just going to write ideas down, but really it's important to think about, right? Like, the writing is not, you don't write to have correct grammar or to, be organized. You write for some kind of purpose that involves ideas. It sounds kind of silly to say again, but there's a message in writing, right? And any kind of writing that you have can have a message. Sometimes its purpose is really, not that strange. It's just like, oh, maybe I'm just writing to record history or something like that, try to record something as subjectively as possible, but it's still a purpose, and it still has a higher purpose beyond that. So let's say I'm recording history on its own. Maybe I want to do that so that the people 100 years from now will be able to access that history with as much as much of an impartial account as possible. So the ideas, according to her, were the most important part of writing's purpose. Writing's purpose is to turn these ideas, these concepts that are just in our brains, and put them onto something concrete and something permanent. Another purpose of writing that she mentioned was the technical purpose. So she mentioned, okay, well, sometimes you use writing to formulate a science experiment or to formulate, a science experiment's report. So writing just as a way, not of expressing emotions or expressing persuasion, but simply of putting facts on paper, putting facts on hard media, which is tied to, the greater purpose of ideas, right? When you're conducting science, you're often collecting data to form inferences, to support theories. This is all brain work. It's all in the dominion of ideas. But she thought, this is also an important part of writing. An important purpose of writing is to be able to record everything that you learn from observation, right? So you observe a thing, you record it down, say, oh, this dog is salivating now. I'm going to write that down, and now I'm advancing human knowledge slowly, very, very, in very small steps, but that's what's happening. Now, next let's talk about what supported her ability to write, or her interest in writing, in and out of school. So the first answer she gave me was that texts that talk about things that matter now, those were the most important. So text about current events, text about news, text about issues that mattered now. So she was less interested in, history or fiction, but more in texts that have some kind of real life bearing that you can learn from, which is definitely important. That composes a large body of writing in the world, and that's constantly getting produced and added upon, and it's constantly useful because it's talking about the real world. So that's one of the ones we have to always look out for, writing that's relevant to now. And then next, she said one of the things that helped support her writing were turtles. No, I'm just kidding, not turtles, but meditation. So she mentioned meditation because in order for her to write, she wanted to be, in a clear state of mind. She wanted to be, mentally focused, have like a kind of blank slate, not be distracted by other things. And I think this ties closely to the next topic, what factors impeded her writing or her ability to write or her interest in writing. And one of them was, her first answer was noisy noise. She didn't like having lots of noises distracting her when she tried to write. And another impediment was deadlines. So she didn't like having deadlines looming over her, and giving her extra, stress or things to worry about when in trying to engage in the writing process. And I think, deadlines are kind of a fact of time itself, but one of the things teachers can do to alleviate the pressure of deadlines and to make deadlines less of a dire matter is to make them incremental, right? To have them on certain checkpoints in the drafting process, so that you don't just have a deadline. Oh, at this date, bam, I have to do the entire paper, and okay, so I'm doing the entire paper like the night before that deadline, and it gets to be some kind of super stressful crunch time. We can avoid that by having multiple deadlines of multiple iterations of drafting, which is also closer to the actual writing process, where you draft and reiterate and keep building upon what you already have and make it better and better and better and better. Another thing that she found as an impediment was when she got a difficult prompt. She said that if a question was too deep and too impossible to answer, then she couldn't really get a grasp of how to get started. So here we have a statue of a skeleton engaged in the pose of the thinker, and he is a skeleton because I guess he sat there thinking too long and all his flesh went away. I don't know, but when you think about it, if a question is too difficult, if a question is too open-ended, if it's too philosophical, that can really cause a student to be like, well, how do I answer this? This is just not clear. It's not like a direct kind of thing. I have to explore some really nebulous territory in order to even begin to have an answer for it, right? And as they learn via, some of the organizational processes like the 5-paragraph format, they have to have some kind of beginning idea in order to even begin to write. So after we look at all these influences and supports and impediments, now let's think about what are the intersections between my perspectives on writing and Angela's perspectives on writing. So the first was that we both care a lot about the ideas, right? We both feel that the ideas, the message, whatever information that's in your brain, that's where it begins, right? That's where writing begins. You have some thought in your brain. You're like, okay, I want to deliver this thought in my brain, and I want to put it onto some media that is permanent. So you can do that by, starting to type. You can do that by picking up a pencil and getting some paper and applying the pencil to the paper. You can do that all sorts of different ways, and they all fall under, the purview of writing. So the ideas are the most important. You can create anything out of your mind, like in this piece of artwork here. You can create an entire city. Entire cities are created via writing. You have to have writing in order to create a city, right? There's all sorts of communications, all sorts of ideas going from one brain to another in order to make something like this. Now, where we had some tension, some diverging opinions, was on the topic of these, as she said, these prompts that are too deep, when you have a question that's too deep. In my perspective, when you have a question that begs, so much more depth and initial thinking, I think that's an interesting challenge, but I can also see, her perspective that it could be so challenging that, someone doesn't know even where to begin. So if you have some question that's way too philosophical or way too abstract, not concrete enough, not anchored by actual literature or actual some real life circumstance, then it can be a real problem. So let's think about some conclusions. What does this mean? What does all of this mean for me and for everyone as prospective English teachers? So what I thought was that our intersection is really important. Our intersection of the idea, the idea that begins whatever you write. So we have this quote here, again from Zen Guitar. The question is, what are you saying with the guitar? Not, can you play this lick, or what's your speed like? It's, what are you saying with your instrument? What is being communicated in this song? Now, a song, it's just like any other, unit of media, and an instrument is just like any other tool of creating media. So I could say, my pencil is an instrument when I'm writing. The point is, you have to begin and end with what you're communicating, and that's definitely something I want to emphasize to, not only myself, but also to the people I try to teach or try to even just talk about writing with. And finally, a final conclusion, the final thing that I think is really important to convey to students is that writing doesn't really have to have a limit, right? Because it begins in the mind, because it begins with any message that you create out of your thoughts, out of your brain. There are no boundaries, right? So in a 5-paragraph essay, maybe you have to have a boundary because of the assignment, or in some other specific, demarcated assignments, that assignment has parameters, you have to meet those parameters. But in the broader perspective of, what ideas are possible to humans in writing, it's anything. You can in this piece of art, you can draw, or you can write a staircase all the way into the sky, and it goes off into infinity. Like it can be anything. And I think that's the final lesson the final and really also the beginning lesson that I would like to impart. And that's it for my Pechakucha.